Hello traders, welcome to the Nexoel Trading Hub YouTube channel. So we're going to be looking at the weekly Forex forecast for the coming week. If you're new to the YouTube channel and you want to be staying updated with our coming content, then you can do well to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So if you can actually remember, last week we saw this fair value gap in confluence with this weekly inversion fair value gap. So last week I told us we should expect to see price return into this fair value gap, which is in confluence with the inversion fair value gap, and then we have the fall of price to the downside. And then I told us that there might be the possibility that price may fill up this fair value gap zone and push to the upside before we see the fall into the downside. But what we can see is that price respected the weekly inversion fair value gap that is in confluence to this fair value gap. So you can see that price actually mitigated the main threshold of the weekly inversion fair value gap, and we had price close to the downside. So you can see that price has been attracted to the sell side liquidity. So I'll be expecting to see further bearish move to the downside next week, since what we can see is that price closed below the fair value gap and also below the weekly inversion fair value gap. You can see price just mitigated the main threshold, and then we have the close of price to the downside. So let's go to the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, if you can also remember, last week I actually identified this fair value gap, which is now acting as an inversion fair value gap. So I told us that we could possibly see that price may actually violate the main threshold just to fill up the fair value gap and possibly mitigate this order flow before we have the fall of price to the downside. But what we can see is that price actually respected the main threshold, and then we can see the bearish move of price to the downside. And last week, we also identified this daily inversion fair value gap, because last upper week, I was expecting to see price return to the fair value gap, face mitigation at the order block, and then we have the continuation to the downside. But then when we drop to the 4-hour time frame, we actually identify liquidity resting at the upside at the swing high in the 4-hour time frame. And then so we expected to see that there's a possibility that price is going to actually raise those liquidity before we have the bearish move. So when we drop to the 4-hour time frame, you're going to see that. So I'm going to regard this as a weak order block because I'm not expecting this to hold price and push price further to the upside. But just the way I would always tell the subscribers in the Telegram community, let's always observe to see what price reveals when the market opens. So now what we are going to see is that price is reacting at the daily inversion fair value gap. Price respected the main threshold of the daily inversion fair value gap we are also having here. So you can see price reacted at the main threshold, and then we have the fall of price to the downside. So what I have here is a sell side liquidity, because price have taken out this buy side liquidity. So I want to see price take out this sell side liquidity. That is why I'm actually regarding this order block as a weak order block. So what we are going to see for the coming week is that we might see the possibility of price still projecting to the upside. Because what you can see, we have this order block here and we have this fair value gap. We have also a breaker, because you can see this is the sell move before the buy move that took out this buy side liquidity. And then we have the fair value gap. So we want to see price push to the upside to mitigate this fair value gap. And then we see price continue the downward movement to the downside to come raid this sell side liquidity and also this sell side liquidity. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, you can actually see that liquidity pool I actually spoke about, which I told us that if we do not see price reacting at this order block, don't want to see price raid this liquidity, react at the weekly inversion fair value gap, which is in confluence with the weekly fair value gap we identify in the weekly time frame, because we have this unmitigated order flow. And now you can see price return into this unmitigated order flow to cut this liquidity, and then we have the fall of price to the downside. And what we can see is that price is reacting at the daily inversion fair value gap. So I want to see further push of price to the upside into this fair value gap that we actually have resting here. You can see we have this fair value gap resting here. So I want to see price return to this level. Regard this as liquidity. So price pushes to the upside, and then we have the continuation to the downside. Except price chooses to do otherwise and then continue the up movements to the upside, and then possibly mitigate this order flow before we have the fall of price. But I'm actually more focused on this particular price zone to see price reaction here, and then we see the continuation to the downside. So we can see price facing rejection at the inversion fair value gap. So let's actually drop to the 1 hour time frame. So here in the 1 hour time frame, just the way we actually identify in the 4 hour time frame, the reaction of price at the daily inversion fair value gap. So we can see the rejection. Price is pulling to the upside. You can see we have pool of liquidity resting here. So we want to see price further push to the upside to mitigate this order flow in confluence with this 4 hour fair value gap, and then we see price falls to the downside. So let me actually try to go further to the 15-minute time frame. Let's see what we can possibly see in that particular time frame. So now what we can see in the 15-minute time frame is you can actually identify this zone here. We can see this is the sell move that sponsored this buy move, and then we have this consolidation here. Price failed to break through this order block, this order flow. Now we can see that now price broke through it. So we can see that price further continued the movement to the downside. Price took out this sell side liquidity. Price returned, took out the buy side liquidity. So you can see we have this as our breakout block here. And then what we can see is that price returned into the breakout block, faced mitigation, and then we are having price pushing to the upside. So we could see the continuation of price to the upside, and then we see price reject to the downside. Or price may possibly fall to this order block before pushing to mitigate this fair value gap, and then we have the continuation to the downside. So this is what I'm actually expecting to see in the dollar index. So just the way I'll always tell the subscribers in the Telegram channel, let's actually observe what price is actually going to reveal when the market opens, and then we can begin to consider the forecast and possibly have a reconsideration of our direction. So guys, let's check out the EURUSD pair. So guys, this is the weekly time frame, and this is actually EURUSD. So if you guys can remember last week, I told us we should expect to see price deep lower into this fair value gap and possibly to the 50% of this candle week before we actually frame the bullish move of price to the upside. What we can see is that price did not actually dip lower into the fair value gap, and then we had price rejection to the upside. What we can see is that now price returned to the downside and then actually closed below the consequent encroachment of this rejection block. So what I'm looking forward to is to actually see that price dips lower into the fair value gap before we actually have the bullish push of price to the upside to raid the buy side liquidity and in extension this buy side liquidity. So let's actually go to the daily time frame. So here we are in the daily time frame. So if we can actually remember vividly, I spotted out this order block, and then you can see the weekly fair value gap where I was expecting to see price would dip lower into to mitigate the fair value gap and the order block before we have the bullish push of price to the upside. But what we can see here is that price just dipped a little lower but did not mitigate the fair value gap and the order block. And then you can see we have the push of price to the upside. Now, what you can observe is we have this breakout block here, and then we have this order block also here. Because price sponsored the move to the upside, took out this buy side liquidity, price fell to the downside, took out this order block. So this is a breakout. So in confluence to the breakout, we have this fair value gap and this order block. So what we can see is that price return mitigated the fair value gap, and then we have price fell to the downside and closed below the mean threshold. So I'll be expecting to see that price is going to actually follow deep lower and possibly sweep the sell side liquidity before we have the bullish push of price to the upside, or price may not necessarily return to this fair value gap. Price may just still face rejection at this order block, and then we have the continuation of price to the upside. So we may have price range here for the coming week due to this order block before we have the push of price to the upside, because we can see this order block swept this liquidity resting here before the movement of price to the upside. So these two scenarios may happen: either price dip lower and take out this swing low and mitigate the fair value gap, or we have price range within this order block and then we have the continuation to the upside. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, what we're going to identify is that we can see that price filled up this inefficiency. Price took out this buy side liquidity, and now we're having the rejection of price to the downside. And what you can further see is that we have this relatively equal low points. So price created this breakout block because this is the sell move that sponsored the buy move that took out this buy side liquidity. Now we have price pushing to the downside. So we could see price push to mitigate this breaker, and then we see the continuation of price to the downside. So if you can remember, I told us that we may just see price respect the order block in the daily time frame. Now, what we can see in the 4-hour time frame, we may just see the reaction of price within this fair value gap. Price will take out this sell side liquidity, this relatively equal lows, face mitigation and rejection at this fair value gap, and then we see the continuation. But actually, price, this fair value gap is actually so close to this zone. So there's a possibility that the market may just push further to this other fair value gap, and then we could begin to frame the buy move to the upside. So we actually have two levels to look out. Well, we have this particular price zone, and then we have this fair value gap to the downside, which is actually also from the higher time frame. So guys, so we could see that price will take out the sell side liquidity, and then we have the push of price to the upside, or price may take out this relatively equal lows, and then we have price push. So we could just see price range here, and then before we see price continue to the upside. Let's check the 1-hour time frame. So this is the 1-hour time frame. So here in the 1-hour time frame, what we can see is we have this acting as the breaker, because this sponsored the move to the downside that took out this low points. You can also see there's a run of this low point. So we could see just price would dip lower into this level, and then we see the rejection, the upside, which is in confluence to this breakout block. We're also identifying here in the 1-hour time frame. So guys, let's check out the GBPUSD pair. So guys, this is GBPUSD. So if you can remember vividly last week, I told us we should expect to see further push of price to the downside. And our target to seeing where price is going to fall to is actually to see price returning to this order flow, which is in confluence to the 50% of this order block that was violated to the upside. Now we can see that price returned just a little further to the downside before we had this bullish right to the upside, but then we are having a down close candle to the downside here. So we should expect to see further push. Price may not really return to mitigate the order flow. But let's check the daily time frame to actually look at that. In the daily time frame, we have this particular order block that was broken to the upside. So if price should dip lower, I want to see price dip lower into this zone before we begin to frame the bullish push of price to the upside. And then if price doesn't push successfully into the zone, then we should be looking at this fair value gap resting above here. So we should be looking at this fair value gap to see price reaction at this fair value gap. And then we see the possibility of going bullish. So what we can further see is that we have this breaker, and then we have the order block. Price return into the break and order block, face rejection, and then we have price close to the downside. So we want to consider these are the sell side liquidity, which is actually a sell side liquidity. So want to see price read this swing low, mitigates this fair value gap, or further mitigates this order block that was broken to the upside. And then we begin to frame bullish move of price to the upside. Let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, what we can identify is, you can see we have the upper fair value gap in confluence with this fair value gap in the 4-hour time frame. So let's actually delete this zone we identified for the violated order block so that the chart will be clean. So now you see we have fair value gap here also. Let's go to the daily time frame. So you can see this fair value gap we identify in the daily time frame. We can see it here in the 4-hour time frame. So we can see it here in the 4-hour time frame. And then we have this order flow. So I'm expecting to see, since I'm expecting to see EURUSD also dip lower before we have the bullish move, since we're expecting to see the DXY push to the upside before dipping lower. So we want to see price push to the downside into this fair value gap here in the GBPUSD. So we have the sell side liquidity. So we want to see price dip lower into this fair value gap. And we have this order flow. And then we'll begin to frame the bullish market structure to the upside. So before we see the continuation of price to the downside, so we may see price may actually just return to this fair value gap price created here. So we may see price return to this fair value gap to take out this candle high points, mitigate the fair value gap, and then we see price drop to the downside. Because we can also actually identify and see that this is actually in confluence with this breakout block. So we can see that now we have this fair value gap and this breakout block, because this is the swing high, a sponsored down move that took out this low, but then price broke through it. So we can see price push to the upside, face rejection, and then drop into this fair value gap. And then we can begin to frame our bullish bias to the upside. Let's check the 1-hour time frame. So here in the 1-hour time frame, you can see the rough price action here. Price created this pullback, and then you can see price was just ranging here. Price broke through, violated it. So we could see a little push of price to the upside before price dip to the fair value gap here, and then we have a bullish framework for us to actually buy to the upside, since we're still expecting bullish ride in EURUSD and then the GBPUSD, and then we are expecting to see more bearish move in the dollar index. So cheers guys, God bless you till I see you guys next week.